Hello and welcome to another episode of the Fully Charged Show podcast. Very exciting to be back with you yet again for another glorious, scintillating episode. Just very briefly right at the top, I don't want to do subscribe because you know all about that. Everyone knows about that. Everyone says that all the time, but please do. And also the review thing has become really lovely and very encouraging. We've had such delightful feedback. So actually, I don't care whether you give us a 1-star review. Please don't. When we get 5-star reviews and people just comment, just take a moment to maybe give us your feedback, positive or negative. We've been looking at it carefully, and we're trying to shape things to keep you entertained and informed. And so that's lovely. So that's on your podcast app or Apple Podcasts or even on the tubes of you. And possibly on Threads now. I'm on Threads, at Bobby Lou on Threads. I don't know why. 100 million people joined Threads in 6 days. Sorry, I mean, it's got nothing to do with this podcast, but it is quite remarkable. And it is, yes, it's another silly social media thing that's owned by a bonkers billionaire. They're all the same. Not interested. Moving on. Today's guest has a long and very illustrious career in the automotive industry. It's a bit of a coup to get this guest. I was very, very excited and really thrilled when he said he'd do it. So I first met Andy Palmer. That's who's on the show today. First met him, I think, around 2010 at a experimental test drive of an electric vehicle that Nissan were developing, but you wouldn't know what it was like, and it was just the actual drivetrain. It had a different body on it. It wasn't what it was going to be. It was called a mule. So that's how they test out cars, and they let me drive it around a very small circuit at the O2 Arena in London. I think in 2010, but it could have even been 2009. It was certainly, so it was 13 or 14 years ago. And you couldn't really tell from that 3-minute drive what the experience of driving and owning an electric car was really going to be like. But it was exciting. And Andy was there, and he was, at the time, the chief operating officer of Nissan. And so he was absolutely at the forefront and at the absolute cutting edge end of a traditional car maker that makes millions of internal combustion cars, making an electric only car. This was not a converted existing vehicle, and I think that's critically important. So he was a really key figure at that time. Well, he then left Nissan for reasons he will explain. He went to Aston Martin, which some of our viewers and listeners may have heard of, a wonderful old British sports car brand, and they did make some electric versions, but they haven't really pushed them in a big way. But that's right. But since then, he's just done so. He's involved with Switch Mobility, which is making electric buses and delivery vans, with Hilo One, the electric scooters, so micro mobility, and most recently PodPoint, the electric car charging network and system and hardware, which is amazing because we've done a lot of stuff with PodPoint and we've talked about them a great deal. I've used, in fact, even this morning, I plugged my electric vehicle into a PodPoint charger at a Tesco's supermarket while I went and bought some veg. There you go. So that's so he has been referred to as the Godfather of EVs, which he's happy to be called, and he's an extraordinary man and absolutely charming. And what he talks about today is fascinating. I think you'll really enjoy it. So I won't waffle on anymore. Let's just say, please welcome Andy Palmer to the Fully Charged Show podcast. So Andy, thank you so much for finding time to talk to us today. And it is weird because ever since I've known we were recording this, I've been scrolling back through my electric vehicle timeline, and I don't know, I've met you so many times, but I can't remember if you were there that day. But really, at PreLeaf, there was an event at the O2 where we could drive a mule version of the Leaf around a little track in a car park.
Crikey, I remember that, yes.
Yeah, oh, you were there? Because I couldn't quite remember. I can just about remember doing it, and that was it was so outside my previous experience. I had no idea why that was happening or what was going on. It was such a steep learning curve. But
we were still playing with the technology there and still working through nascent customer need and what early adopters would need, and just the whole concept of whether an electric vehicle would work. It used a prototype LEAF platform, but had a upper body on, as I remember.
Yes, it does. It was a different body, completely different. It didn't look like the LEAF that we come to know and love. But I mean, it must have been. I'm just sort of thinking back. One of the sort of themes that I've been aware of since I've been making this show, and is the kind of the engineering challenge and the technology challenge of using electricity to move a vehicle.
Yeah,
is either a nightmare or a really exciting challenge. Bit of both, really. But I mean, it has been an extraordinary journey when you think of it.
Yeah, the big concern, and I think well proven over the sort of 15 years that have passed, was always about making sure that the battery failed safe. And actually, in retrospect, one of the things I'm most proud about with LEAF is, touch wood, we never had a fire. We had incidences during development of the battery and in the battery factory itself, but to the best of my knowledge, LEAF never experienced a customer thermal incident, as the industry would call it. That could, on one hand, we could have been accused of being quite conservative, and it's no surprise to you. I know that you own them. The original 24 kilowatt hour battery had limitations around range because the energy density wasn't so high, and certainly before I left, we'd finished the development of the 30 kilowatt hour, and we'd embarked on 40 and 60 more or less. And that the 60 requiring a change to the rear suspension. So that was getting a little bit more extreme, but it was all part of the learning of how to manage the battery. And it's one facet of the unique experience of really delivering that first mass production electric car. Others included the it was really the first connected car for Nissan as well. But things like the noisemaker. What does a noisemaker look like when you don't have anything to guide you? Basically, you're really the pioneer in that area.
No, I mean, it really was. It was so noticeably the very first electric car that was built as an. I mean, that was always what blew me away. I mean, I know it came a little bit later, but the Zoe and the Leaf were those first two cars where you couldn't buy a plug-in hybrid or petrol Leaf. They just didn't exist. It was always, and I think that it showed in the thing. And I won't remember. I mean, I don't want to talk about him in great detail, but the one time I gave Carlos Ghosn a lift to his jet back in the day.
I hope it wasn't a music box, was he?
He was sitting in the passenger because it's so difficult not to do a joke. Yeah, he was in the trunk in a box. No, he was in the passenger seat, very happy. But the mistake I made, and I meant it in the most flattering way, was that the car was as good as a Golf, and I meant that in terms of build quality for a first edition car. I've still got that car. It's absolutely fine. We have replaced the battery a couple of years ago, but that was just because we could rather than we needed to. It still worked. And I've got a 40 kilowatt hour battery in it, and it's amazing. It does, it's great.
I've just bought a 2011 Leaf, actually.
Right.
So I wanted it in the collection as one of the two bookends of my career, and it's on its original battery, and it's all good, and the build quality is honestly it's
amazing. Yeah. But that was, I mean, so your history in in the automotive industry is really impressive. I fact that every time I looked you up, it was always said the Godfather of EVs, which I think you should hold proudly. I mean, I think that's it.
I don't know where that came from, but I'm happy with it because I think you stuck as the grandfather, and I was definitely more happy with being the grandfather. I'm pretty happy with the Godfather.
Godfather's better, yeah. But then I think also the other, it's a very spurious connection we have, but there is one that my brother, who is 3 years older than me, is now retired, did his apprenticeship at Aston Martin's.
Oh, fabulous.
So I can't remember how long, a long time ago, 50 years ago probably, but it was an amazing, it gave him an incredible grounding and skill, and engineering skill, and he absolutely loved it.
One of the very few companies left in the automotive companies left in the UK where it's not owned by another OEM. So
Right.
all the decision making, all the development, all of the R&D, all of the manufacturing is all under its own control.
Right.
But basically, as a opportunity for an individual to learn, it's a marvelous place.
It must be amazing, yeah. And I mean, that was, and it was also such a. I was really surprised at the time that you made that leap from, because I got to know. I think we met a few times when you were at Nissan, and then you suddenly went to Aston Martin, and I went, oh.
I loved my job at Nissan. I was given complete full reign on product and marketing and basically all of the key elements of doing business. And Goen was very good like that. But also, it was very clear to me, this is 2013, 2014, when I was Chief Operating Officer there, it was very clear to me that because of the politics that eventually played out between France and Japan and ownership or alliance, and all of that was starting to bubble, it became very apparent that I was never going to be the CEO of Nissan. I was just the wrong color passport. And so I had this great dilemma. I mean, it would have been my goal since I was 20 years old to be the CEO of a car company. And it was like, do I give up that or what? And then Aston came along, and it was 5 miles from where I went to school. It seemed to tick all of the boxes of the things I learned. I was in a bit of trouble, more trouble than I knew which I found out when I arrived. And there was just this opportunity to rebuild an iconic car company, and it was too big an opportunity to miss. And that's why I went. And there was a journey towards electrifying, particularly the Lagonda brand. And we showed and demonstrated the Rapide at it was at the Monaco Grand Prix, I think. There was a journey there as well, which would have moved us probably to synthetic fuels for Aston, but for the Lagonda brand, it was definitely electric.
Right. But then, all the other things you've done have just been extraordinary. And I've read a lot about your attitude to this country, because that is a thing that I've been, I suppose, moaning about in a not a very effective way. Since I made a series for many years that our listeners overseas may not be aware of, but called Scrap Heap Challenge, which was an engineering challenge show. And all the way through that, what was just endlessly repeated was the skill, the dedication, the imagination, the creativity of British engineers, and our long history in, right at the forefront of the Industrial Revolution, and it feels like it's gone a bit from this country. It's so sad.
I agree, and I mean, it does appear to be in the DNA, that inventiveness, that mixture of risk-taking, entrepreneurialism, and just good, solid engineering. And we do create some great students coming out of university, and we actually get some great technology coming out of university. So that initial inventiveness, I genuinely believe, is still within the DNA of the engineers that we're bringing up today. And the lithium-ion battery was invented in somewhere between Oxford and Manchester universities. But where we fail is in that development and application stage. Lithium-ion batteries basically had to be developed in Korea, Japan, and China in order to be properly funded. And that funding there I think is the key. There is a great adversity to risk from the investment mechanisms in the UK and from government. Government has also been, honestly, pretty lousy. Government of all colours have been pretty lousy in getting behind the good ideas and seeing them through in a way that you don't see coming either from the East, the really, really long-term thinkers, or indeed from the Silicon Valley attitude to build and fail, but each time move forward. So much greater appetite for risk. We in the middle, the UK, and to some extent, I have to say, Western Europe, we're really not that good at getting behind our engineers and getting behind good ideas and making them stick. And it's a shame. You know, we're auto industry, go back to the 50s, we were number 2 in the world. And we were
which is incredible, isn't it?
Today was 19th. We're 19th.
Right.
We're below the likes of Czechoslovakia and Slovakia. And that's not decrying them. That's a statement about the UK and its inability to grow its industry, which is a great pity given that there's 800,000 people employed in the industry, plus the side effect it has in terms of funding universities and everything else. So, I mean, I talk passionately about this to largely deaf ears right now. It's a real pity because, you know, ultimately, if we don't start seeing investment in battery factories in the UK, ultimately, 10 years from now, we won't have any cars being built in the UK. And that, we have to get that voice understood in Whitehall.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's a huge challenge. I mean, the sort of British Volt, I don't know what else to call it, debacle. I mean, it was just so sad that there was this really exciting company with, you know, a location which made sense geographically and technologically. I mean, it was just such a brilliant opportunity.
Absolutely. Location was perfect for what they were trying to do.
Yeah.
But they can't do it by themselves. No battery company can. And without the carrot and stick, the carrot being some form of decent incentives. I'm not talking here about not free enterprise or free market. I'm saying that you've got to offer incentives at the same level as the EU, US, India, China. I'm not talking about tilting it to an advantage. I'm just saying that from a carrot point of view, you've got to have incentives at least equal to your competitors. And then from a stick point of view, you've got to give a reason to buy British. And I can't think of a better reason than to be able to say, you know, basically we're going to tax you around a carbon footprint, for example, because bringing batteries made in China all the way across the world gives you a huge carbon footprint. Or we're not going to give you any more incentives unless a certain proportion of your fleet is using British batteries. So there are ways of conforming with, you know, basically the World Trade Association, but being much more proactive around supporting British industry. And unfortunately, we haven't got to that point yet.
No, absolutely not. And I mean, what's your take on the Internal Revenue Act in the United States? Because from what we're hearing from people we know in various car companies, it's a phenomenal. It's having a big impact, and
it's huge. It really huge. You get something like $35 per kilowatt hour in incentives, which is just enormous.
Wow.
Now, you know, you take that against what you get in the UK, which is practically nothing. And obviously what happens is that for the first time in my career, I mean, basically I've been in this industry 44 years. You always had a sense of competition between UK and, let's say, France, Germany, Italy. In fact, the very first gigafactory that I was responsible for building, which was the Sunderland factory, that almost went to Portugal because there was a competition between the two. Especially Lord Mandelson that saved that got that victory right in the last 24 hours.
Right.
I have never known Europe to be in competition with the US. Up till now, US made US types of cars, big pickups and what have you, and Europe made much more efficient family cars. Never the twain will meet. Now, very clearly, battery makers in particular, cell makers in particular, are looking at the US and say, I could make in the US and I could import into Europe. And the incentives that I get in the US make that worthwhile.
Right.
So, and of course, that's without saying that there continues to be a big competition between Europe and the UK. And you've got Europe as a big EU bloc versus the UK. And we're not competitive with either of those, which of course is why we don't have any battery factories other than that Sunderland one.
Yeah. And the Sunderland one is, because I knew about that at the time, but is that still functioning? That is still producing batteries now?
And I believe will be expanded potentially. It was just over 1 gig.
Right.
And I think what you'll see is what's been committed is that will expand it up to 10 gig.
Right.
Great. Which sounds great and is great, but still only a relatively small proportion of what the Sunderland factory can make in terms of cars, which implies that it's not assuming that it's going to cover all production in Sunderland, or Sunderland's volume will contract, and that's the fear that one has to have when you look at that. I mean, you probably need more like 30 gig. But let's hope that Jaguar Land Rover and Tata bring that factory, their factory, which is somewhere between 40 and 60 gig, allegedly. Let's hope they bring that to Somerset.
And I mean, you'd know the answer to this, because it's something I've heard mentioned and I've certainly discussed in the past, is the kind of car companies that we have a very amazing, long international reputation and are still here. So Rolls-Royce, Bentley, Jaguar Land Rover, Aston Martin,
McLaren.
I'm just worrying if I'm forgetting any. Morgan.
Morgan.
McLaren.
Yeah, let's throw in Caterham. So that's
and Caterham. Yes, we're going to see a Caterham soon.
Racing for them this year, so let's not forget.
Oh, good. But when you think of those, and Lotus, oh my goodness, sorry, Lotus. But generally speaking, they're at the upper end of the market. So you're not seeing there's not a kind of indigenous Renault or I don't know, I'm just trying, or Volkswagen. I mean, we don't have the equivalent of that anymore. I mean, presumably, what was British Leyland was the closest we would have had to that a few years ago.
Yes.
But it is the kind of high-end cars, which is nothing to be ashamed of, but it is, generally speaking,
but it does
big.
It does pave way for a valid discussion around how you make affordable electric cars.
Yeah.
There are only 2 brands in the UK right now which you can buy for less than £30,000.
Right.
You need that breakthrough in that £20,000 to £30,000 area. Now, there's an irony going on right now that you will almost certainly picked up this point about local content. And in 2024, so 6 months away, you have to reach a certain local content. Unfortunately, almost all batteries in Europe are at the moment are coming from China, basically.
Yeah.
So it's very hard for almost any car built in the UK, electric car built in the UK, to reach the minimum local content. I think it's 40%. Right. And so for any that are exported, there'll be a 10% tariff. Now, the cars basically don't make any money. I mean, they make money on the after sales. On the primary car itself, very rarely makes money. So you add a 10% tariff, that either means the price is going up by 10% or the profit is coming down, is increasing by 10%. It's a real big deal. This is, and the EU won't move, the UK can't get a move. And so we enter into this territory where cars made in the UK will predominantly be loss-making.
Right.
At the same time, the only guys that can make affordable electric cars are the Chinese, partly because of their government's incentives, partly because they've got economies of scale. And guess what? They can import cars into the United Kingdom without tariffs.
Yes.
How's that for a collection of black swans? And so what we will see, I'm sure, and this is not to decry the brilliant job that the Chinese have done, but we're going to see a lot more Chinese vehicles because it'll be the only ones that are affordable.
I've got one parked here right now. So that's it's just
they're great. BYD, MG, Neo, Polestar. They're great cars.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure because that was a thing that really struck me when I suddenly recalled that. It was a Geneva Motor Show around the early development of the Leaf, that period. So 2010, 2011, I can't remember exactly when. I remember walking around the BYD stand.
Yes.
Which was really small and looked a bit, worse for wear. And I have minimal aesthetic judgment of vehicle manufacturing. panel gaps, of all those things. But even I could see these cars looked a little bit dodgy. I said, I do not want one of those. And they're all electric. They were kind of the early vehicles they made as taxis.
Yes.
And you see them now. I drove the BYD Atto 3 in Australia recently. My sister-in-law has one. It's as good as anything I've ever driven made in Europe or America.
Couldn't agree more. I've had the opportunity also to tour the battery factory at BYD and of Geely,
right.
And it's just on a scale that you wouldn't believe when you go there. I mean, it will have, and is already starting to have, the same impact on us that the Japanese had in the 70s and 80s.
I mean, in a way, what we can hope on our damp island is that someone like BYD or NIO or XPeng or one of them decides to build a factory outside somewhere.
Yeah, probably you're right. I mean, I'd love to say that we should do it all alone, but clearly that's not going to happen. But what you do need, this gets a little bit into the politics, but what clearly you need is an industrial strategy that lays out your plan as a country for electric vehicles and for battery manufacturing. And then you need to stand behind that plan. I mean, because, you wouldn't invest in a company share that didn't have a corporate plan. So why would you invest in a country that doesn't have an industrial policy? And that's one of the clear things I think. I mean, we've heard this debate about, politicians or the civil service in Whitehall saying, well, we don't need a car industry. If that's the conclusion, then that's fine. Go and spend the money on AI. But I don't think it is, because, even if you think about you want to be big in AI, where do you test AI? You test it in the car industry. So I think ultimately we'll wake up one day and the risk is we'll find our car industry is gone. And once it's gone, it's not coming back.
Yeah. But then the other areas that you've worked in, which is I find really encouraging, is public transport and micro mobility. So the switch bus. Now, it took me a while to work out. Oh, that's who that is. But is that is? I'll just say this: a really noticeable difference. I spent last week in London,
right?
And the thing I always, because I don't live in London anymore, but the thing I always connect London with is the smell of diesel.
Yes.
And I walked along a street the other day, Westbourne Grove in West London, and 2 electric buses went past, 5 electric taxis, and about 20. Of course, it's West London, it's posh. 400 Teslas and 50 Porsche Taycans, but a huge amount of electric transport going along the street, and it didn't smell as bad, and it really was a noticeable difference.
And that actually is a key point, because we generally view, well, CO2 is bad and we've got to attack CO2, and electric cars are part of that story. But you have to remember that electric cars are not free of CO2. You create CO2 in the creation of the vehicle. And you can arguably say that in some context that there may be better solutions, particularly heavy vehicles or sports cars or what have you. But where an electric car will always win is in terms of tailpipe emissions. There are not. And so if you put clean air high on your agenda, particularly in urban environments, then we should be going electric. And in saying that, what would you do? Well, you'd attack the taxis, the buses, and the vans. And if you did that, something like 50% of the particulates in London city centre come from buses and taxis. And with a relatively small fleet, you can address the clean air very quickly by going electric. So electric is in the tribalism that one sees around, EVs are good, EVs are bad, and it's worse and worse and worse. You've got to blend the benefits, and EVs are not perfect.
No,
they have other benefits as well, and that I think is where a more balanced debate. And when you go through that natural balanced debate, I think where we'll end up is 95% of vehicles on the road being electric. And something around the edges where other appropriate technology might exist.
No, I mean, I lived, in fact, I'm an honorary member, which is the most ironic thing in the world, of the Bugatti Owners Club.
Oh, cool.
I've never had a Bugatti. I think I've been in one, but I've never had one. But because I argue passionately that they should remain, combustion engine vehicles. They're really old.
Yeah.
There's not many of them. They get driven 3 times a year. They probably burn, 10 gallons of fuel a year at the most.
Yes.
It's utterly irrelevant in the grand scheme of what we need to change.
Well,
But, and they should, and they're amazing. And I want my great grandchildren to see a car that has explosions going on in a metal box at the front to know that's how we used to live.
You can do that with net zero carbon. You can do that with synthetic fuel. Synthetic fuel is going to be expensive, but perhaps for the people that own a Bugatti, perhaps that doesn't matter.
They're not so worried.
So
but I mean, it's certainly a thing. I'm doing a talk in a couple of days. I always start off by saying electric cars won't save the planet. That's not what is going on with them. But I mean, they do. I do really feel that they change your kind of attitude and your understanding of I never thought about it before. All the years I had petrol cars, I bought petrol and moaned about how much it cost. I never thought, where does it come from?
Yes.
What does it do after I've used it? Where does it go? Where does it come from? Where does it go?
Exactly.
And electric cars do make you think, kind of consider those things
for
a while.
I think there's obviously there was the debate about electric versus hydrogen. Hydrogen, it may or it may not have a place in transportation, but what I think it does is raise the awareness as hydrogen and its uses for net zero carbon in other things. Hydrogen for sure is the right solution in heating houses and creating concrete, etc., etc.
Right.
So
steel making,
So exactly. So there's a lot of places that the technology can be used before it gets to cars, but it's the debate around its use in cars that probably takes most attention, and it raises the profile and the importance of getting towards a net zero future.
Yeah. Because when you were, if you can remember back then, you developing the Leaf in the early days, I was kind of forgotten. I suppose there was a sort of derision and resistance to it. I mean, I certainly was aware of it with the Prius. I remember talking to people at Toyota once the Prius kind of took off, but the first 4 or 5 years, it was just universal derision from the automotive press and really low sales. It took a long time till that started to sell millions of cars,
Well, absolutely. I mean, first of all, the city didn't support it. They saw us as just building loss-making cars.
Wow.
She did. When we launched Leaf, the bill of material was higher than the selling price. So
wow. So not even the manufacturing, not even the people who make it.
Right.
That's amazing, isn't it?
But we also faced a lot of ridicule in the press.
Yeah.
The same people now that are doing completely the opposite. Some of those people are actually the same people. But the one that I remember was a US manufacturer that had heard that we'd spent about $4 billion creating these, and said that we'd been better off putting it into a case and dropping it into the Pacific. It would have been a better use of money. I always keep this. I don't know where you can see it, but I like to keep these things around.
That's right. Was that you at the Tokyo Motor Show in 2011 or something? Was that one? I can't remember.
Yeah, I think it was. Yeah, exactly. And I remember one journalist. I won't say who it was, but we were in a big room, and there was obviously a discussion around CO2 warming of the planet. And the journalist at the back of the room stood up and said, "I don't understand how this is helping to not warm the planet, because I put my hand on the vehicle and it's definitely hot."
Right.
So there's a lot of it that is. I mean, look, the education that all of us been through over the past 11 cars. I think most of us in our consciousness know about the importance of climate change.
Yeah.
Most people have got past, is it fake or not? I think we can all understand that it's real, and we as humanity need to do something about it.
Yeah.
It can't be just one nation by itself. It can't be just cars, but we can all play our small part in preserving the planet for future generations.
Yeah. Yeah. And it is. I mean, I think I don't want to go into it now because it's too tedious and annoying. But the sort of fear, uncertainty, and doubt that is ploughed into the topic is extraordinary. When and I've withdrawn as much as I can from that battle just because it's exhausting and
Well, yeah,
depressing. But
certainly, electric vehicles damage the create potholes. Electric cars,
yeah,
you can't go into parking structures. Those are just
yeah, yeah,
ridiculous. Ridiculous.
yeah. But it works, I think, because all it does is delay. Some people who may have considered getting one will go, "Oh, I don't want to now because I don't want to make potholes." So it does.
And that's why I think we need to see much more balance, and that's why I
Yeah.
see less tribalism on both sides. I mean,
Yes,
there
absolutely.
are lots
Yeah.
of EVs
Yeah.
that they go too far.
Yes.
They
Yeah.
push too hard, and likewise, the zealots of combustion engines push too hard. You've got to find a route in the middle, and you've got to be honest about the upside and the downside of new technology.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing with the hydrogen, because I always want to not have that debate. Because if I'm cycling along a safe cycle path in an urban environment and a hydrogen bus overtakes me, I'm much, much happier than if a diesel one does. It's as simple as that,
I think that's it. The enemy here is CO2.
Yeah.
Anything
Well, and particulates and
particulates, yes.
yeah.
Anything that improves that is good. And different technologies are on different timelines.
Yeah.
Even the electric vehicle, it's not a panacea solution until you can get to making zero carbon batteries, until you can get to heavier energy density. One of the big disadvantages of the batteries is that the energy density is 100 times less than petrol. So a natural barrier to overcome. But you get hydrocarbons from petrol, so that's the advantage of that technology. And if it was a simple argument, we'd have got there years ago. It's a constant level of improvement, but any step in the right direction needs to be welcomed.
Yeah. Here's one you might be able to answer, because that is, I get asked this and I'm just baffled, is that, when you look at the price per kilowatt hour, there's the energy density per kilogram of the LEAF was much lower than we've got now. But the price per kilowatt hour to produce a battery pack was huge then, and it has gone down. And I can see that the kind of equivalent size and vehicle as the original LEAF have much bigger battery packs that aren't that much heavier because they're much more energy dense.
Yes,
but it doesn't reflect that much. The price. If you just look at the battery pack price, a car with a 250-mile range now should cost about 10 grand.
Yeah.
And there's no way that's happening.
And it's a real point. I mean, you're right. Look, when we launched LEAF, I think we were paying close to $1,000 per kilowatt hour.
Yeah.
The price today is probably $140, $150. So the price reduction is enormous. But we're sticking huge batteries. I mean, basically, LEAF was 24 kilowatt hour. Most of the cars today are 60 kilowatt hours, and they go all the way up to 110.
110.
Now, why are we doing that? We're doing that because we're making up for range anxiety, or let's call it charger anxiety. So one of the areas that one needs to look at really urgently is deployments of charging networks. So whether that's fast chargers or slow chargers, but they have to be ubiquitous. You have to be sure you can find a charger that works. Once that happens, you can start to reduce the size of the battery, because you don't need to carry all that redundant weight and energy density around. I suspect that the right answer is somewhere between 24 and 30 kilowatt hours for a B segment car. So along the lines of LEAF, actually, and that would halve the price of the battery. Remember that the battery accounts for about 40% of the cost of the vehicle.
Right.
So if you're at 60 kilowatt hour at $150 per kilowatt hour, you cannot make anything other than a $30,000 car.
Right.
Zero profit. But if you halve the battery, then you can realistically get to somewhere in the mid 20s and still be profitable. So I think the answer, yes, there is the usual Moore's curve of cost reduction and energy in intensity. That will continue to happen. The biggest change that you can make is basically reducing the size of the battery. But you'll only get the consumer to go there if they know they can easily charge it. And that is the honest answer. to a $20,000 car.
Yeah. And it's also the thing that, I mean, the one I do, and I made a joke out of it, but it is actually a genuine thing, is bladder range, which reduces with as the years pass for gentlemen. But I mean, it is, it's really bad for you to sit driving a car for 6 hours without stopping.
Yes.
Which you can't. Yes, I mean you can do it in a diesel car or something, but it's really dangerous for you and for everyone else on the road because
Yeah.
and it's bad for your body, So I have to stop. 150 miles is my. I've done 172 recently in one go, and I was so proud.
Well, that's pretty good.
Yeah.
The other side of that is that you want to have probably an 800-volt car that will allow relatively.
So it charges faster. Yeah.
Inabat, which is the company that I chair, the cell manufacturer, we've just developed what we call an E33 cell that's capable of being charged from 10 to 80% within 15 minutes. That's ultimately, when that comes to market, that obviously reduces that dwell time. 15 minutes is basically nip to the loo, get a cup of coffee from Costa's and get back to the car and
run back to the car. Yeah, it's quick. Yeah, it's no time. But the other advantage of a smaller battery is obviously weight as well as size as weight. Yeah. I mean, and I think that, I can see that possibly within my lifetime that we'll be fitting batteries to cars that you could not maybe lift up on your own, but two of you could lift up. Much smaller. And you could make smaller cars.
Micromobility is also going to be important. That I'm developing with high-low electric scooter.
Yeah,
one that addresses safety, basically.
Yes,
but ultimately that ability to integrate your transportation. So let's say in the morning you come out of your house, you jump in your car, you program your office, but obviously you can't park by your office. So in programming your navigation, it also programs the scooter, and or it shows you, drive to the rail station, take your scooter on the train, get off the train, jump into an electric taxi, stop, and the last half a mile you're on your scooter.
You do your scooter.
That integration that probably becomes important for the future.
Yeah. Because, the other one, I know we haven't got much more time, but the other one I'd love to run past you is when I see things like more autonomous vehicles, I'm not convinced at all. That's maybe, but the notion of car sharing, which I have seen a good example of in the Netherlands, which was very popular and is growing very rapidly. And when you see that, you go, just from the point of view of a user, wow, that's brilliant. I could live in a city, not own a car, but whenever I needed one, I've got access to one.
Yes.
Which seems to be like quite a pleasant solution, but that's fairly challenging to the existing automotive industry, because that basically, essentially it means less cars. You're going to sell less cars.
Yeah. You'll see modifications of that already. Things like, I don't know whether you've come across a company called Onto, the subscription business, EV subscription business. And it makes, rather than car ownership, you're a member of a club, basically. And you can have a car for a day, a month, or a year. But it means that to some extent the car is more of a consumable, but it gives you much greater flexibility in life. You can go for a period where you don't have a car, and then you can get a car for a day. So there is adaptations of that car sharing that I do think are very relevant.
Yeah, and do you feel that within the consumer world of younger people now, who are now driving around? I don't know if there is less. The things that I used to hear about, I couldn't be seen dead getting out of a Nissan LEAF. I remember that, people were you must be so ashamed. And I go, no, I'd be more ashamed getting out of what you drive, mate, because you look like an absolute, but is that fading? I feel it is a bit with my son, for example, who's 30, he's not bothered.
People probably end up more around justifying driving a gasoline car than driving, let's say, not so cool Nissan LEAF. I think in many respects, you have to justify why you are not part of the challenging to solving climate change.
Yeah.
And certainly, I feel the need and do offset my carbon emissions for the cars that I drive. I have a small collection, and that at least makes me feel good about myself. as an advocate of electric vehicles.
Yeah, yeah. Andy, you've been amazing. Please come back on the podcast again. Because we barely touched on this. I really want to talk about the scooter and the buses and everything else you're doing. I mean, you're a very busy man. I'm a little bit older than you and getting frayed at the edges. So I'm really impressed.
Well, I've just, as you might know, I've just gone back into executive management. So I've just taken the role of chief executive for PodPoint, which is no point in talking about the need for proliferate charging facilities. It's better to get in and try and make it happen. And so, over the next 12 months or so, I hope I'll have the ability to impact on the availability of charging points.
Yeah, which is really good, and I'm an avid PodPoint user, so it's right. That's really good. Other charging networks are available. It's got to be balanced like the BBC.
Yes, but not as good.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Andy. It's been a real joy talking to you. Thank you so much. Well, thank you very much, Andy. Thank you very much for listening. I'm really glad that he could do that. I'm really hoping we can get him to come to some of our live shows in the UK next year. Our next live show is in Vancouver, British Columbia, in September. And boy, are we looking forward to that, because it is an amazing venue. And there's going to be some amazing cars there that no one's seen before outside of various other countries that aren't Canada. We're really excited. We've had some amazing little nuggets of information coming out of the Canadian team that are putting together this fantastic show. It's going to be amazing. So if you're in the Pacific Northwest of the United States or the British Columbia region, please do come along and see us. It would be very, very wonderful to see you. That's all. I think that's all I've got to say this week. I will join you again next week with another fabulous guest on the Fully Charged Show podcast. So until then, if you have been, thank you for listening.